Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending where you are. We have a special edition of the Awe podcast today with dear friend Lefteris Heretakis from the New Art School, here to talk about education, design, tech, AI, all those great subjects. What survives when AI comes for design? So that's the theme of today. Lefteris, would you like to introduce yourself to our lovely audience?
Hello, Christian, and thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast. My name is Lefteris. I'm a designer, I'm an educator, and I'm a podcaster. So I've been teaching for some time, I've been designing for much longer, and I'm just trying to offer some solutions to everyday challenges in design and design education.
That's great. We know that education is so important. It's how we're going to form the youth, and also, we have learners of any age. I know people doing PhDs in their 70s. You can learn at any age, and education should be a lifelong journey, right?
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about the new art school in general. Then we'll go into more subjects that we've prepared for.
Absolutely. Well, the New Art School was created as a response to, again, when I started teaching, I found I was discovering some challenges, and then of course I had to apply, of course, the design methodology. I started doing research, and it took some time. It took me going into a postgraduate qualification in education as well on how to teach, to do some digging on the history of education. So after some time and after some education projects, and of course many years of teaching, the New York School emerged naturally from my work, actually, as a response to try and tackle the challenges that educators and designers are facing every day.
Thanks, Lefteris. And you use the right word, response, not react, right? So it's a thoughtful response. And you said teaching. Maybe we can even deconstruct that. Are we still supposed to teach, or should we focus on the learners? What's the best education environment? Which might even, you know, throw away the word teacher. That might be a dirty word for some. What do you think about that?
Well, the old structure was a pyramid. So the teacher was the light and was guiding, it's top down. And in many companies as well. That's the old structure. The new structure is the circle, whereas everybody is in a circle and is in communication with each other. So the learners are feeding back, and the teacher is feeding back, and everybody is working together according to the needs.
Uh,
Because you can't, for example, teach a different class in the same way. My teaching completely changes according to who I have in front of me. You have to be responsive to who is in front of you, and adjust the teaching accordingly.
that's great. So we're talking about context of the class, of the individuals in the class, of maybe even the time of day or things that are happening, in the media, in the news, in the student's life, or in the teacher's life, that bring context and dynamism to the classroom or the learning environment. Is that correct?
Especially the different cultures, different backgrounds. A class that's more homogeneous culturally, it is very different. It's not so interesting actually to a class that has like students from all over the world. It's much more interesting. So it depends. It really depends.
And more we can talk about also interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary, where it's not only the cultural background but also the education or the work background that can be different and add new ideas and creativity in a collaborative way, right?
Absolutely.
So you said that the design education might not exist in the future in 2 3 years if nothing changes. So it seems like it's an urgent plight. What do you mean by that specifically?
I mean, in a very precise sense, if what we call design education is essentially a course in software and producing polished outputs, then the version is already obsolete. Okay, the machine does it faster, cheaper, and without complaining. So if schools do not fundamentally rethink what they're for, they will not be able to justify their existence, and students will rightly stop attending. They'll lose interest. So what I'm describing is not a dystopia; it's a selection pressure. The institutions that survive will be the ones that can answer a simple question honestly. What do you do that subscription to a generative AI tool cannot? So, and also they need to go deeper. So yeah, design education is on the surface basically. Yeah, will not survive. Design education that goes deep will always survive. So it's about adjusting. Um, you can't offer something prepackaged. You can't offer something very on the surface to students anymore.
And it might be construed in different way. And for the listeners that are not specifically in design, can you define what design education is or is supposed to be, and what is it supposed to produce?
I mean, it's very different on a very different levels. Because if you're talking about, it depends on if it's on an introductory level, if it's in higher education, and there are also many kinds. I guess the kind that we're talking here is higher education is taking place in universities. Okay, of course, there's also wonderful education in apprenticeships, people in companies, people learning, on their own, which is a little different. So it depends on what level you're talking about.
Um, and what do you think that the best design education should produce?
The best design education in higher education, you mean?
Sure, let's.
Yeah, I mean, this is a complicated issue, and it needs to be more specific, maybe. But of course, students that are aware and agile and adaptable, not so fixed, not so stuck with a specific area, being able to adapt, being able to respond. But for them to do that, it takes a deep learning and a deep cultural awareness and deep historical awareness. Yeah. So students that are aware of culture, that are aware about music, they're aware about architecture, they're aware about history, they're aware about the past and the future. So basically, they're not so fixed. They're not just have learned one little process. They're not so stuck to their own little process, their own little work. In the past, it used to be that somebody graduated with a specific way of working, and they kept doing that way of working throughout their lives, and that was enough. Unfortunately, it's not enough anymore. So students will go through, as graduates, through various career changes, and especially it's usually about the 10-year cycle. This is what very few people tell the students. They've got about 10 years, and before they need to reevaluate where they are and what they are doing.
Well, we can talk about interdisciplinary, knowing about history and philosophy and education and psychology and economics as something useful. And I think you mentioned the word flexible, right? Flexible mindset, flexible education. I think they're tied. And the opposite is fixed, right? We don't want to have a fixed.
Yeah, I mean, they need strong roots. They need strong roots and flexible, leaves. If branches. Sorry, flexible branches. But the roots need to be strong. If the roots are strong, then they can be very adaptable. But if they're not properly educated, and they're half baked in some schools in some parts of the world, give students a lot less than actually what they're promised. A lot less education, a lot less contact, a lot less. Students are getting less. But they don't know that because they don't have anything to compare it to. So to properly train a designer, it takes about 7 years. The only discipline that has done that is architecture. It's kept that is architecture. Most students now think that with a 2 or 3 year degree, they're ready to face the world. But it's really a 7-year cycle.
And are some schools designed to do that? There's a 7 years curriculum?
No. I mean, there are 4. There's 4. There's 5. Depending. Of course, then you can go to apprenticeship. So in industry, you always perfect your education. Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be 7 years in education. It needs to be also blended with industry and experience in the real world.
Well, I think even from the kindergarten, the grade schools, the idea of mixing experience and theory, right? And you mentioned roots. I love the analogy. So solid foundation and then experimentation, exploration, right? I think those those balance and those elements are very important and crucial. And sometimes schools focus too much on one or the other and don't know how to integrate them.
It's too much on the surface. Many schools are worried too much about the portfolio and how it looks. And many schools curate the portfolio so it looks pretty. Oh, look what we're producing. But this is like a very thin veneer without any depth. There's nothing behind that.
That's definitely what we've seen in society in general. Looking at the news, social media, looking at people's attention span and inability to have those beautiful conversations like we're having. And I know that you're having at the New Art School. I'm also following some of those conversations, which are great. Tell me a little bit and tell the audience. I've also done some research on education, but let's talk about, for instance, Waldorf for starting, and maybe we can dig into a few other thinkers about education. And
that's really wonderful, because a lot of the research has to be current. We have to be like the last 10 years, and the New Art School doesn't have those limitations. It just goes 100, 200, 500, 10,000, doesn't really matter. So yeah, Waldorf education comes from Rudolf Steiner, who was an Austrian philosopher working in the early 20th century. His central insight was that education must address the whole human being, not just the intellect. He spoke of head, heart, and hand, thinking, feeling, and willing. The idea is that you cannot truly develop a person by only training their analytical mind. You must also cultivate their emotional intelligence and their capacity to act in the physical world through craft, making, and embodied experience. So the students in Waldorf schools learn through story, rhythm, movement, art, and practical work alongside academic subjects. The developmental sequence matters enormously to Steiner. You do not teach abstract mathematics, below 7, like language and mathematics. So he said that up to the age of 7, it's only art and music. So there are many principles there that we can learn, and this has been going on for a very long time. So we choose to ignore systems like Waldorf.
And what would be, there's 3 stages, right? So 0 to 7, 7 to 14. What would be the main components of each 3 stages of learning, according to Steinberg and Waldorf?
Well, the stage that is really important and that concerns me, because I've seen it in practice in young kids, when you give a 5-year-old, for example, to learn multiplication and grammar, what you're doing is you're making them feel that they're not, they're not intelligent or smart. You make them feel you incapacitate them, and that's the traumatizing experience. I'm very much more interested in that side. That many schools are giving kids advanced subjects too early, so then they feel stupid their whole life. But it's not their fault. They don't know that they're not at that age yet. They don't have the capacity. So what I'm stressing, because I'm not an expert in early years, but what I know through many years of research and study is that the problems we have in higher education come from early years.
Mm.
So if you don't give, for example, kids, like in some countries is happening right now, they don't have art education at all, then they don't know that it exists. And then, art, music is extremely essential for development. You need that. So then you can go and research subjects more. I think speaking to a Waldorf teacher some years ago, they said they give computers from the age of 14, which is very interesting. So there are stages, but what I'm more interested is that kids right now need more art, more music until the age of 7, because some are not getting it at all. And what that happens then is that they don't know that it even exists, so they can't study it at a higher level.
I would agree with that insight. I know that there is some mixed, evidence-based studies on Waldorf's effects, versus Montessori and other system, and it's not clear in the education literature. But from my personal also experience and research, my happiness framework, the 8 Ps include the word play and playfulness. I'm doing a lot of research on unstructured play, on creativity, and the effect of music listening and music playing, and that makes sense. maybe there's not a specific age. Maybe brain development can vary. I don't have all that information, but I do know that children are definitely not playing enough. Adults are not playing enough, and there's not enough art and opportunities to play in school in general, right? We find that it's very rigid, it's very structured, and how can we design to create environment for creativity, play, music? Kids going outside of school, right? Why are you stuck sitting in a bench when you can be walking in nature
Absolutely.
and learning at the same time?
Absolutely.
And if we're looking at the classroom and the education systems potentially as students being consumers of knowledge, instead of producers and creators of content. Same thing with social media. Yes, we're creating content, I guess. It's better than just watching, although, it's always a balance. But also the quality of the content. What is the foundation, and how can we help the youth be creators and not just social media creators, although that's great, but something that has less format, that has more freedom, that can expand. Looking at some research in creativity, the interesting balance I think you mentioned, right? The foundation and the branch, right? So it's like the ability to have a good foundation, but also to have enough freedom to explore.
Yes. Absolutely.
So let's talk specifically about AI. We're talking about the subject of today. What survives when AI comes from design? You mentioned, okay, maybe we're all gonna not be able to design because AI is doing it better. Um, but what was the core failure inside the design, education in general before we talk about AI, and then we can
Yeah.
dig to what AI is doing.
Okay. I mean, AI is revealing things. It's actually revealing problems that existed before. So we're confusing output with formation. Schools are measuring the wrong thing. They're optimizing for the measurement. They're looking at portfolios uh, and asking whether they look polished, as I said before, rather than looking at the student and asking whether they're generally developing as a designer and a thinker. But this is not unique to design. It goes throughout education.
And
The grades, the qualifications, the measurable outcomes.
it might go to organizations as well, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
we're looking at the
The
product,
metrics, the obsession with metrics.
the
So
KPI. Mhm.
you end up with students who could perform competence, without having internalized it. This it's like, and not only that, but we're still using something that was developed about 200 years ago, but the world outside has changed. So in education, we're using systems that are antiquated, but not antiquated in the wrong sense, because of course there is good examples of tradition, like my favorite thinkers like Friedrich Froebel, John Ruskin, John Taylor Gatto, many others, many others. So
Well, talking to about Gatto, he proclaimed that homeschooling was perhaps giving 5 to 10 times more better learners than the educational system.
absolutely,
And so he talked about homeschooling and deschooling,
yes,
or unlearning, right? Can you
yes.
talk more about that? Because I think that's very interesting. I also believe and see the effect of unlearning as very positive.
I mean, Gatto was very unique because he taught in many kinds of schools. So he taught in the schools with kids coming from very poor backgrounds, and schools with kids coming from very rich backgrounds. So what happened was that in the school with the poorer kids, they gave them the multiplication table as homework. And in the school for the rich kids, they said your homework is to get a meeting with the mayor. So he saw this discrepancy and started digging and digging and digging. And of course, he found what happened in the 19th century with the Prussian education system, and how the Prussians lost a battle from Napoleon, and how then the generals came together and said, okay, what's wrong? Why did we lose a battle? And then the general said to the politicians, they said, sir, we lost a battle because our soldiers did not obey our orders. And they created then Prussian education system, which was about following orders, removing individuality, removing thinking. So in order to produce compliant soldiers, workers, and consumers that are not generally free thinkers.
Well,
So that environment might have served, that time, but it's not serving this time because the world inside the school has become very different from the world outside the school.
well, one may argue that it is still serving this time because there is still this need to have consumers or predictive members of the society in a conforming mold. Hopefully, we can elevate education. Yet we have to acknowledge that there is still some pressure to have this type of education that is curated and that is only served for goals of, perhaps, people that benefit from it. I think that we should make sure that the learners and the students are benefiting for it, and that includes, bringing more freedom, autonomy versus authority, right?
Absolutely.
And how can we, talking about AI, look about the attention and the intentionality or purpose that students or learners are having or should be having, and how can we design better for that?
Okay. I mean, yeah. This is. It's complicated. It's a very complicated issue because the thing is that many educators are entering education without actually having run a design department, without having designed anything themselves. Okay, so they've never faced a real client. They never navigated the actual complexity of bringing something into existence in the commercial environment. So this damage is not obvious. This is damaging attention and intention. When a practitioner teaches, when somebody that has been in the industry, has designed something for a very long time, they're teaching from inside the experience. Their attention is what it actually feels like to do the work. So I'm more of a practitioner. I'm teaching as a practitioner. I'm not teaching theory. The one is learning swimming from a book, and the other is trying to learn swimming from a simulated swimming pool. It's very different. So this is really what I mean. It's complicated because art and design schools have lost their independence, and are under other schools. So, for example, other disciplines look at what's going on in the art and design schools and are deciding what happens. So while certain things might be very good for certain disciplines, like for example engineering, let's say, while something might be very good for engineering, it's not good for art and design or other disciplines. So really, when the art schools lost the autonomy and when it entered the university, it had to comply to certain things that to certain structures that suit other disciplines, but really do not suit art and design education. And that's how a lot of the educators are being evaluated, or how they are being employed. So all these people, because in the recent times, when I was a student, it wasn't so formulaic. You didn't have to tick all certain boxes. All you had to do really was be a great professional. Like my teachers were great professionals. They were great designers, they were great artists, practitioners. And that's the transmission, that's the experience they transmitted to me. And so it's like a line. It's like a tradition that you're transmitting. But if there's a break in that tradition, then the learner can't receive the experience.
And AI might be accentuating this break, right? And AI cannot, well, eventually can, or as starting to be with cars and robots, but doesn't have the same practitioner, the craftsmanship, or the embodied experience that a human being can have and impart, right? We can talk about co-regulation, co-learning, collaborating, and are those things useful for true learning and not superficial learning, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the real question is what cannot be automated? And it's a very complicated question. But I think as a question is more important than the answer. I mean, I have some answers, but is to discover what cannot be automated and focus on that. While of course, playing with the AI is just another tool, of course, definitely. But we have
Well,
to look at what we know. We have to look at that we're also physical human beings as well as digital human beings.
we had another podcast on your podcast last week, and we talked about creativity, um, and all very good subjects that we broach. But coming back to what AI can do, we talked last week that AI can be creative and possibly, to some metrics, even more creative than human beings, right? On some metrics. But one thing that I know that AI cannot do is be curious, right? AI doesn't have innate intrinsic curiosity. If you don't prompt them to do something, he's not going to, or it's not going to look for something, right? So I think that's one thing that we can focus on is
And that
building
curiosity is
curiosity.
a gateway, is a gateway to many things.
Mhm.
It's like a door. It's a gate that beyond curiosity there are other things that need to be discovered. But absolutely, what you're saying is curiosity is essential. As learners that don't have curiosity, are not going very, very far.
Sorry about that. I was curious
Of course,
about who was curious. Um, so, in effect, curiosity is for learning. It's good for a relationship because I'm curious to know more about you, Lefteris. I guess you're curious about what I'm thinking. We can be curious as a community that you created the New Art School that we're also creating at Digital Wellness. Those community, those interaction create connection, and they create deeper connection when we have that curiosity aspect, right? When we can
absolutely,
say, yeah, what can I say more? Like, and what's interesting is that curiosity and creativity, um, neurologically, they come from the same kind of discovery, openness to experience aspects of the brain. And a good thing that I can share for the listeners, we're talking about art and creativity. And I talk to teachers all the time, and especially art teachers and art education. And the big problem they face is that students will tell them, "Well, I'm not creative,
yeah.
right?" Or
That's
I'm
that's the result. That's the result of schooling.
yes.
That's the successful application of schooling. That's exactly what schooling is designed to do.
And we know from the neuroscience that I study and that we study as a human species. Um, as you know, I love neuroscience. We have neuroplasticity. So
Yeah,
the student or the person, or even yourself, telling yourself, "I'm not creative." Yes, there is some, innate when you're born biology. Some people are a little bit more creative than others. That is true. Yet we can foster it, or we can lose it, as you mentioned. Maybe you were born creative, and the school system or the education told you not to be.
it's
Told you
yes.
to
This,
sit
this is
with-
this is the most common story.
Yes, and we can practice creativity, and we can design for it. Right? We can give opportunities for unstructured play. Play is a form of creativity, and it's kind of safe because it's high stake enough that there is a play, but also not deadly that if you play and you get it wrong, you lose, and it's over, right? So encouraging play is something that I think Frodo also talked about. You want to talk about play a little bit?
Absolutely. From which aspect?
How can we incorporate more of it in education and in life in general?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very big question. That's a very big question.
And
Just to
let's bring it back to design. How can we design environments, physical, virtual, that include more play and the right type of play?
no, I mean, yeah, it's it's really the beginning of play is uh, when there's no doing things wrong, or you can't do something wrong. You well, the process what you're producing is ever evolving, is continuing.
Yeah.
So again, going back to schooling is when students have been conditioned that there is a right and a wrong answer,
Hmm.
and the teacher has the right answer, and the student has the wrong answer. Again, in many cultures, that is really deeply ingrained. And to try and get that deschooling, deprogramming out of, that's what art and design education is doing. It's saying, hold on, what you have learned, I mean, in higher education, what you have learned, and the students are really disappointed because there comes a point where, oh my God, what I was being told for 18 years is completely wrong. The teacher doesn't have the right answer. He doesn't have the answer. We teach process, we teach methodology, we teach one of the ways of doing things, and we hope in design, what you mentioned, we hope that the students develop their own methodology.
Hmm.
We show a general methodology, but it's not the absolute truth and the absolute methodology. It's not dogma. It's a method it's a way of navigating uh, through a challenge, But a good design teacher will hope and will try to help the student develop their own personal methodology. But the only way for the student to develop the methodology is if the student has applied the methodology many, many, many times. Because it's like learning a tool. It's like learning to use a paintbrush. Okay, here's you have a paintbrush and paint, but in order to paint with that paintbrush, it takes years of practice. The same with what we call design thinking. The tool is very simple. I can say it in 1 minute. Yeah, but the application of that tool and the student making it their own, finding a way to make their own tool so that they know how to use, and they can develop a different methodology. But that can only come after applying design thinking many, many, many times.
I love that idea of being not only humble but being hopeful that what we're teaching now can be improved, can be played with, can be completely discarded if needs be.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think that's one of the things that,
As long as the learners can justify it.
yes.
I always say to my students, say anything you like. Why don't contradict me? The opposite. I don't mind, of course, but as long as you can sort of have a rational process about that, you can explain explain your thinking, because process when you're learning design, the steps you've taken to reach a result are far more important than the result itself.
Yes.
Because if I know what steps you've taken, then we can trace it. And if you're not happy, like let's say there are 5 steps. If you're not happy with step 4, you need to go step 3. If you're not happy with step 3, you can go to step 2. So it's an ever-evolving process. And if you're stuck somewhere, you can always go back and do some more. So I'm really interested in process, in the way students get results. And that cannot be done in a high-speed way. That takes time.
And it cannot be evaluated in the same way that most school system and education systems are based on, right?
I mean, we have our own ways of evaluation, and we evaluate every step. And usually, when a group of good teachers get together, they get actually the same result usually they're down to the very percentile. But yeah, I mean, of course, we evaluate the steps, but that even doesn't matter. When a student goes to get a job to an agency, when a graduate, they'll never ask what grade did you get. They'll say, show me your portfolio, show me your work. And that's another thing about the deschooling process. you know, is that when students come to art and design education, it takes time. It's very hard to explain that the grade they get, it does not matter. What matters is the portfolio they build, the skills they cultivate.
Because they've been conditioned to think that
Yes,
the grade.
yes,
Yes, and you
absolutely,
have to kind of explain that shouldn't be the focus. And if you actually focus too much attention on that, you're missing the other important part, right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But that's why it's such a difficult process to learn design, because you have to know so much about so much. And again, when you go to solve a brief, if you're designing, let's say, packaging for tissues, for whatever, you have to learn more about that. And each brief, you have to learn again from the beginning. Okay,
Hmm.
what is that I'm designing? The designers learn again, so it doesn't stop.
Great insight. And let's say we deschooled and we broke down everything that was not right. What would be, in your mind, in your words, three things that we should optimize for if we make a new education system?
Okay. Oh, um, I mean, this is really one thing, and that's where all the students are confused, and it's not their fault. Again, it's our fault. The students have been born into a digital world, and they didn't have the time to make that transition like you and me had. So we start from kind of a more analog world, and we transition to a more digital world. So we're asking the students to design, because part of the design process is referring to an analog way of expressing. It can't be digital. We're flesh and bone. We're quite analog
Hmm.
as well. So it's really that relationship between analog and digital. Because if you're trying to design an experience in a digital environment, you need to have experienced it in an analog environment to correct for that. But if you haven't had enough experience in analog environment, it's really complicated for you, and you're really baffled by just designing something in digital. I don't think most students are able to understand, because they haven't experienced so much the analog. So they cannot understand the digital, because the digital is a simulation of the analog.
And it seems that they're becoming more and more actually afraid to experience the analog.
Yes.
They dread physical
And that's the fault of the
contact,
education.
eye
Instead,
to eye,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
common laughter. They're
Instead of
not.
throwing them deep in the deep end of analog experience,
Yeah,
and then say, okay, from that experience, now design in the digital world. It's not different, but one is a simulation of another.
we talked, and yeah, it's very interesting. How can we use technology, because there's some good things in education for technology, right? So, for
Absolutely.
instance, you can have more personalized learning. You can have instant feedback. There's a few positive aspects, and it should not be discarded. Um, Yet, how can we encourage technology to help? Analog at for instance, we created a phone that challenged students and youth to go outside and go to a swimming pool and go for a walk and go to nature and read and do other things off the phone, right? But most of the design is for you to stay on the technology, to have the engagement and the metrics and the retention and the ad revenue and all that stuff, right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. I mean, no, it's to teach students, making sure the students understand analog, they understand digital, and they understand how these things relate. What's the relationship? They're very confused. And it's not their fault, because nobody has bothered to really ensure that they are having more analog experiences. And it needs to, and some analog experiences need to be forced. There's some talk about, explaining what is digital good for, what is AI good for, and what is analog good for, and how did all these things combine. The new discoveries is in the combination of these things. That's where the very interesting, is in the intersection of analog and digital.
And we are going more digital, so we have to kind of look at a balance and accept and be happy that the technology is there, that digital is allowing us to do many things, that AI is allowing many also great things. Yet, kind of really thinking, designing, in enhancing the conversation and the embodiment of being present, of being in nature, of going to a field trip at the museum with the class or the
And that's
cohort.
become more and more difficult. I mean, you ask many educators how much paperwork. It's like, okay, 10 forms for each student, or like, permission, or you have adult students, and you say, oh, parents' permissions, like they're above 18 or whatever, to go on a field trip or something.
Yeah,
That's in some schools, again, I'm not generalizing, but the kind of paperwork you need, the responsibility, like you take adults to a design museum, for example.
hmm,
You're taking some adults to a design museum.
that's complicated. Red tape, right?
Those schools can be very complicated. It's
Wow.
like, hold on a minute, these kids are above 18. It's like, okay, yeah, okay.
And there's this whole other conversation about children. We talked about play. Children that are in many countries not allowed to go out alone until they're 12, depending on the country. And a lot of parents, including myself, I'm a parent, complaining that they should be able to go out at 5, right? Play with the neighbor's kid, go get the groceries, right? And that's the exploration phase that not only in the education in school, in the society, in the legal system, are telling us, no, protect the kids. They need to be safe at home. And by the way, what do they do at home? They're on their tablet or the gaming, or right? And that's not a safe environment either. We know about cyberbullying and the dangers and what happened with using AIs and other tools on the internet. But you cannot go play a few meters away with your neighbors and go get some milk and cheese for your parents, right?
There's
So yeah, there's a lot of thinking and design that needs to be done as at a mass level to include exploration, play, and just to look at some studies that I've looked in neuroscience in terms of creativity. We know that there's 3 different main brain region. One is the default mode network, one of the central executive network, and the other one is the salience network. And those 3 works in combination. And the default mode is more like daydreaming, and the executive is more like focused. Salience switch between the two and look at external threat, right? So there is some study, and I quote here, Betty et al. At 2018 showed that fMRI study linked creativity, subjective and objective creativity scores, are linked with more connectivity between those 3, right?
yeah,
You don't want to be stuck only daydreaming, and you don't want to be stuck only focusing. You
yeah,
need to have those 3. And
absolutely.
there's another study, Betty and Kennel, 2023, that also talks about what we call associative thinking, right? So it's being able to link things that are unrelated potentially and making those connections, right? So it's connection between ideas and connection physically in your neural networks. And we need kids, adults to go on field trips. We need employees to go and create and go outside of their comfort zone and to explore, to have this optimum creativity. And we also know that creativity is linked with intelligence, right? So there is some neuro divergence of giftedness spectrum of intelligence and IQ text that we won't go into. But intelligence is linked with creativity, and we know that creativity, as we talked about, can be learned, right? So let's try to
Hmm,
bring more creativity to schools, to educations, to families. I think we can do it. What do you think?
absolutely.
What are some
Definitely.
ways that you think we can enhance that, if there's?
Ways that we can enhance creativity.
Yep.
Okay. Um, I mean, we've kind of talked about it, but really, um, oh, this is a complicated one. It really, hmm, um, creativity in what sector exactly?
Um, Maybe creativity. let's talk with another C, the seven C's and the 13 C's happiness framework. Confidence. How can creativity and making failure and resilience
Yeah,
increase
yeah.
confidence?
I mean, you know, art and music um, enhance creativity because the artist realized that there are multiple answers to the same question.
Hmm.
Okay, and that is the central lesson of the arts, is that there is not just one right answer. There's many right answers. Where in other disciplines, that's not the case. So the realization that that is true is one thing,
Great.
and then of course the responsibility to apply this realization, and that requires um, being an adult in many ways, and that's what what we're talking about earlier, is the danger of the infantilization of society. So the maturity to apply the fact that we have many right answers,
I love
because
it.
it's one thing to realize something and another thing to be able to apply it. But in
Yeah.
an infantilized society, you can't apply that.
And I work in neuroscience and psychology and see clients, and most of the time when I'm coaching, the person after a while, or the couple or family, can understand the concept, but it's very difficult to apply, right? So I really like the fact that you emphasize the maturity to understand, to be aware, and also to apply, right? Action and creating those habits will make everything else easier once you actually go ahead and do it with confidence and other tools and creativity. Creating these opportunities to learn, and to learn that there's many opportunities, right? So and many right answers. We talked about associative thinking, and I think what you're referring to is divergent thinking, right? So instead of converging to one answer, divergent thinking is that there's many answers.
Well, yeah. I mean, we talked a little about hand-heart-eye coordination.
Hmm.
What the design process itself is imagination, will, and action. It's these three. You need these three. Because it's like what I say to my students. You want to come to the class. So basically, you wake up in the morning and you imagine you want to come to class, and then you say, "Oh, I want to come to class," and then you come to class. That simple thing is the whole design process, because you can adjust all three areas. You can make adjustments in all three levels.
And in sometimes the action can precede both the will and the imagination, right? So you move yourself forward, and then your imagination, your default mode network, can create a story about the action instead of the story creating the action as well.
Well, usually the action is created by a feeling. You have the feeling, and you act upon that feeling. Uh, but I mean, yeah.
So what you talked about reacting to what was going on. What was the main problem that you were trying to solve creating the new art school?
Well, there are multiple problems, of course. um,
I know.
there are multiple, and there are many levels. It's hard, as I said. We can talk about things simply, but it's again we talked about that. It's about the gap between creative development and what schooling is delivering. Yeah. So having taught for a long time now, I keep on seeing people that have huge creative potential, um, and curiosity, but again, schooling took a lot of that out of them. Um, so really, I mean, all good design, all good art and design educators do the same thing. They try to de-school, to go the opposite direction. Uh, but again, to talk about how this is done in a practical way, because again, it's all very nice, you know. Many colleagues go to conferences and we all talk, and my podcast, other podcasts, and this podcast is wonderful. We do all this, but then we got to go out and do it.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm most interested in, because it's not being done as it used to be done, and we don't have that spontaneity, that honesty, that openness of conversation. Everything is hidden behind certain measurements and certain expectations. But art and design is not like that.
Well, thanks for sharing this, to be honest, and most importantly, thanks for doing it. Like you are there in the trenches, doing it every day, doing it in many countries, creating those communities. So love the conversation, and love the actual. Let's do this. Let's not just talk about it.
Yeah. This is the most important thing.
Yeah, and you talked about spontaneity.
Because sorry to interrupt you, because on every level there is an increased resistance. So on the level of imagination, there's little resistance. On the level of feeling, there's some resistance, because some fear might come, some doubt.
Mm-hmm.
On the level of action, there's tremendous resistance, because then you get societal pressures, then you get your programming, your schooling, your surrounding, maybe your friends telling you, oh no, this is too risky, or some part of your family is saying, oh no, you shouldn't be doing this. Then you get increased resistance on every level. That's why doing it is the hardest.
And I think that when we think about education, I talked about like confidence, right, which is one of my framework for happiness and for performance as well, right? And how can we build in this education to not only talk about creativity but confidence, right? Because we know as we're doing more and more, we'll get resistance from our own biology and brain, and a lot from the social, the culture, the pre-programmed conditioning, that if you go outside of what everyone's doing, or you're told to do, or you've been told to do, you believe that you need to do yourself, it's become harder and harder. It's like you're climbing a mountain, going to Mount Everest, and there's less and less air to breathe, right?
Absolutely.
Because you're alone at the top, right? But building and educating, to me, like building confident leaders, confident students, artists that can have the confidence in life to do it, even if it's tough, and especially if it's tough and challenging, actually.
Absolutely.
And we've talked about the design school. What are the downstream consequences of making better education schools?
The downstream consequences.
Yeah. What can we expect from the efforts that you and the New York School and other thinkers and doers are doing?
I mean, design is not a specialist activity that happens in studios, and just stays there. It's the shaping of environments, objects, and systems. So basically, I mean, when something is badly designed, a badly designed bridge will collapse, and it kills people.
Yep.
So there's no room for errors.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to work. But something that's badly designed visually, or an object, it doesn't exactly kill people, but it creates discomfort. It creates ugliness. People feel it. Not everyone might feel it, but something that's badly designed, it has consequences, because maybe of happiness, of enjoyment, of other things. And also the quality of design education is connected to the quality of those built environments. So a badly educated designer will design bad and ugly solutions.
I really like that. I mean, I love beauty. I love awe. I try to help people have more awe in their life. And I think design, art, there is some proof that art, including design, architecture, can create awe moment, right? And awe is a mental, emotion, physical state of discovery of creativity. Awe increased creativity, as we talked about the subject. Awe is one of the gateway to that. But can someone perhaps say that it's subjective, like what is beautiful, what is ugly? What would be like a non-abstract way for you to help people think of judgment of what is this design? What is this portfolio? What is this art piece? Can you elaborate on that? And I know it's a tough question, but
It is a tough question,
you
but
got
of course, I can try and answer it simply. I mean, it doesn't. Okay, in design, we talk about the grid, and the human body is based on the golden section. For example, the distance to your from your arm to your hand, it's all around the golden section. And if you see like a beautiful building, every measurement is related to each other in the golden section.
Mm.
So really, it's about proportion. And proportion is in Greek logos. It also has to do with speech. It has to do with many other things. So something that's badly designed, for example, we can start. I talk, for example, that if something's badly proportioned, let's call the relationship of width to height, which is a very simple thing. But that proportion, like if you have a tablet, let's say, with a bad proportion, with a bad relationship of width to height, that affects everything you see in that tablet. Because the proportion determines everything that's inside. So there's many aspects. If something is beautifully proportioned, I mean, we're referring to the golden section, but it's not absolute, of course. There's a grid, and you can use the grid, and you can break from the grid, and of course, that's what designers do.
I would same in photography, and there might be some similar concept in music, where when you're going off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Of course, there's harmony, and there's this harmony. Of course, it's not absolute. Of course, the designer can break that intentionally. But somebody that knows how to use proportions and knows how, can design very beautifully. And usually bad design is something that you have to start looking at it from the proportion, from the level of relationships.
Great. Thanks for explaining that. And, again, I love the fact that we talked about exactly the same two things, right? You need to have the basic, you need to know about the proportion, and then you need to have the freedom to break them with intention, right? And flexibility, yes. Right? Yes. So, I mean, that's a great way to kind of start to close the discussion. I did want to leave the chance to the audience, if you are in any of your ability to text any message on LinkedIn, on X, on Facebook. This is the Q&A for Lefteris and myself. We have a really good expert on design, education, and art. And we have AI Chris that's pretending that's not real Chris. So, is there some practical takeaways that you can leave the audience with in terms of what we can do in design? What can we conceptualize AI not as a threat, but there was already something before? What can we learn from this discussion that you might want to impart to the listeners?
Okay. I think awareness of history, of all kinds. I think that the message is to apply, because a lot of the educators, a lot of the researchers, want to keep on researching, but the fact is we have the solutions. And we just need to apply the solutions. There's this, I'm an advocate of what's called reflexive research, which nobody's or very few people seem to be doing, which means that you research, you discover, you apply, and if something is wrong with what you've applied, then you do more research. But you don't do more research until you've applied.
Mm.
So if people need to go out and create and do what they're thinking of doing, not just keep it in the imagination or in the feeling level.
Well, I'm an entrepreneur, so I do every day with a lot of uncertainty and just doing and researching and making it better after.
And I also for the students, I've discovered through reading a beautiful quote from my favorite designer educator, Paul Rand, and he says, "Self-expression is real only after the means to it have been acquired."
Wow.
It's what we talked before. You build
Yep.
the base, you build the strong roots, and then
Yep.
you can be flexible.
Mhm.
But you have to acquire the means. You have to understand how this works. So if it's visual, design is mainly visual. You have to master the visual. If you're a musician, you have to master the sound. You have to have a master. You have to have some skills. And that's what a lot of design education is not cultivating in the students. It's not cultivating skills. It's cultivating surface pretty patterns. But without the roots in the skills, yeah, they haven't acquired the means for self-expression. So many students are just parroting in many ways.
Well, thanks for that quote and those thoughts. At Odd Digital Wellness, we help a lot of schools, educators, school districts, NGOs about youth, and we see a lot of schools struggle with bureaucracy and many things with mental health of their students. So we're trying to kind of do a preventive approach for mental health, and also letting them know that we can not only be preventive, but we can be proactive and we can be positive. Right? It's not just about mental health as a negative. Are you having it diagnosed, or how can we think about mental wellness and well-being? With concepts of happiness and well-being and creativity and curiosity, and helping teach that. Yet there is a lot of resistance, right?
Of
So
course.
we have our programs. I've been doing other team members. I've been doing workshops. We're helping schools in a real way. But what would you say to a school that is still stuck in the system? What would be a first step to the right direction?
Okay. Sam Conniff wrote a book called "Be More Pirate," and I was involved in that movement when it was more active. And Sam says small steps of resistance. Try to do some small steps first, like little things that you can change. You don't need to start bringing the system down, but see how you can do a little thing. Change something, and many small changes create a larger change. But so start small, start creating small changes, and then the bigger change will come after enough people have applied the smaller changes.
Thanks for that. And action again.
Yeah, of course.
I love this idea of reflective research. So this is a podcast, but also very evidence and research based. So today we did our collective research. Let's go back in the world and do it. And let's do another podcast in a few months. I would love to
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a real pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much.
And thanks for being here with those very interesting insights. We do have at Odd Digital Wellness a new and a third podcast this week on Friday. So if you want to tune in, we'll have Friday at 12 Eastern Time, noon. Lefteris, enjoy the rest of your day. Let's really be in touch and love these amazing discussions. Let's hope to have one soon. So see you in the next stream, which is Friday, Mid-Career Mental Health, What No One Tells You About Burnout in the 40s, with our special guest, Sanjay Anand. That is Friday.
Wonderful.
So see you there.
Thank you.
And thanks again, Lefteris.
Thank you.
Where can we reach you, audience members?
If you Google my name, you'll find lots of things. There's Linktree for the Linktree of the New Art School. Linktree New Art School has all the work of the New Art School. If you Google my name, Lefteris Heretakis, you're going to find lots of stuff. I'm quite active.
I can definitely talk about this for another hour or two, but we'll schedule it for another podcast.
Wonderful.
And thanks again, Lefteris. Have a great day and talk soon.
Thank you, Chris. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.